Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 24. This is Metabolism and Nutrition. I am going to cut this chapter a little bit short because we are running lower on time this semester. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what energy is, what metabolism is. Then we'll talk about how we gain energy. And so all living things require energy, and we are living. We use energy for muscle contractions. You can see this person has a lot of muscles. She's doing a very, very high jump using a pole vault. We have to be able to, or we use energy, I should say, to pump our blood, which is what brings oxygen and nutrients to our cells. We use energy to synthesize new molecules. We use energy just to take in oxygen from the atmosphere. And energy is produced through a process of breaking down organic molecules like glucose. And this forms a type of energy that our cells can use, which is ATP. And so this is just the definition of metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all energy requiring and consuming processes. And so it's basically the chemical reactions in all of our body cells. So what actually is energy? It's the ability to do work and bring about change. It is invisible, but it does produce responses that are visible. So energy exists in two different phases. There's potential or stored energy, and then there's energy of motion. And we can always convert energy from one form to another, but if we do so, we lose energy in the form of heat. Heat is energy that we can't use for anything else. That's actually stated in the first law of thermodynamics. So the most common form of energy that our body uses is called chemical energy. This is a potential energy, and it's the energy found within the bonds of molecules. So when you have those covalent and ionic bonds, it's that energy present within those bonds. And when we release the energy from those bonds, then we can use that energy. So other forms of energy that we also use, electrical energy, and electrical impulses, which are what our nervous system uses. Mechanical energy, so motion, which our muscular system uses. Sound energy, again, nervous system for hearing. Radiant energy, nervous system for seeing. And then heat is the byproduct of the conversion of energy from one form to another. So ATP is the energy currency our cells use, and we have talked about ATP in the past. ATP is what drives metabolic reactions. And ATP is an adenine molecule with a ribose, so that's the adenosine. And then there are three phosphates. It's that high energy bond between the second and third phosphate that makes ATP great energy. When we break that bond, we release a phosphate, and then we have adenosine diphosphate. And that energy then can be used to do work. So what is the term catabolism? That term means the breakdown of larger molecules into smaller subunits, and it is a process that releases energy. So if we take food like this, fruits, vegetables, proteins, whatever else, fats, and we break them down into their smaller subunits like amino acids, glucose, fatty acids, that is a catabolic process. We're taking something large and breaking it into smaller subunits, and in the process we release energy. So what is anabolism? Anabolism is the buildup of large molecules from small subunits. So if we take these fatty acids or these glucose or these amino acids and we build up new proteins, or we build up fats, or we build up storage of glycogen, that's going to be an anabolic process. In those processes, we use energy. So we're taking in energy. Catabolic reactions release energy, and the energy that is released can drive anabolic reactions, which take in energy. So during a catabolic reaction, which I just mentioned, proteins are broken down, lipids are broken down, and polysaccharides are broken down into their monomers. Then these monomers can then be used to synthesize large molecules in an anabolic reaction. So in a sense, catabolic reactions drive anabolic reactions. What is an exergonic reaction then? An exergonic reaction is a reaction where reactants have more energy than the products produced. And so in the process, we are releasing energy. So energy exits the process. So an exergonic reaction releases energy. Exergonic reactions are catabolic reactions or decomposition reactions. An endergonic reaction then is the opposite. The reactants have less energy than their products, which means the reactants need to gain energy to produce the products. And so this occurs in anabolic reactions or synthesis reactions. So here we have a higher energy molecule. Let's just say this is glucose. And we're going to produce something like carbon dioxide and water. So in that process, glucose has a higher energy than the products. But over here, say we have amino acids. Amino acids have a lower energy than the protein. If we want to build up proteins, we have to put energy in to build those molecules, that larger molecule. The last definitions we'll talk about are oxidation and reduction. Oxidation is the loss of electrons, and the reduction is the gain of electrons. But in biology, we learn that when you lose electrons, you also lose hydrogen ions. And when you gain electrons, you also gain hydrogen ions. And so here we have some reducing agent that's going to donate its electrons and hydrogen to something else, and this agent becomes oxidized. Here we have an oxidizing agent that takes in the electrons and hydrogen ions, and this becomes reduced. So oxidation and reduction go hand in hand, and they are coupled reactions. You don't oxidize something without reducing something else. So now let's look at how we produce energy. So the process of energy production in humans is mainly through cellular respiration. It's an aerobic process where we oxidize glucose through multiple steps, and in the end we produce ATP. So there are 4 basic steps to cell respiration. The first step is called glycolysis. The second step is transition. The third step is Krebs or citric acid cycle. The fourth step is electron transport chain. So in the glycolytic pathway, this is an anaerobic process that occurs in the cytoplasm of our cell. This process occurs in all living organisms. So bacteria use glycolysis, and so do humans. We start with a glucose molecule, and we're going to end with 2 pyruvate molecules. In the process, we're going to oxidize the glucose, and we're going to break it into 2 smaller subunits. This path actually contains 10 enzymes. But if we're going to oxidize glucose, if we're going to oxidize glucose, we have to reduce something else. And so we have coenzymes available that are going to be reduced. And those coenzymes are called NAD8, or NAD, which is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, that will get reduced. So for glycolysis to start, we have to first have an input of energy. So just like if you need energy in your body, you have to eat food, which takes energy to chew it, to absorb it, to digest it. It takes energy to break glucose into ATP. And so to start the process, we activate the glucose in glycolysis. This is going to then convert the glucose into two molecules called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. These glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate are then oxidized, and then NAD is reduced, and we produce pyruvate as a byproduct. During this process, I told you that all organisms use it, and there are some organisms that can only use the glycolytic pathway to produce energy. And that means that we have to be able to produce energy in glycolysis. And we do when we are oxidizing the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and converting it to pyruvate. A process called substrate level phosphorylation occurs. So this sounds like a really fancy process, substrate level phosphorylation, but really all it means is we're taking a phosphate and adding it to a substrate. What is a substrate now, you might ask? And that's a great question. A substrate is anything you're working on. So if you are an artist and say you draw portraits, and so you use a sketch pad to draw portraits, or maybe you use clay to make different objects, and so you mold clay into different items. The substrate that you would be using would be the paper or the clay. In this case, the substrate we're talking about is adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. And if we take a phosphate and we add it to the adenosine diphosphate, which is our substrate, we produce ATP, which is the energy currency of our cells. So really, substrate level phosphorylation means take a phosphate, add it to a substrate called ADP, and produce energy in the form of ATP. So in this process, we produce a total of 4 ATP, but we only get to gain 2 ATP. And the reason for this is we use 2 ATP at the beginning to activate our glucose. So we only get a net gain of 2 ATP in the end. So it's not a high energy process. This entire pathway is not very high energy, but it is a way to produce some ATP. So the end product of this pathway, and I'm going to go back once more, of this pathway are going to be a total of 2 NADH, you can see one here and one here. You're going to have a total of 4 ATP produced, you can see the 2 there, right? But only a net gain of 2 ATP. And then we have 2 pyruvate are produced in the end. We oxidized glucose, and we reduced NAD to NADH and produced ATP in a process called substrate level phosphorylation. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll get into the next video where we talk about the fate of pyruvate.